everyone. My name is Dana Lynn Varga. I'm a soprano voice teacher and arts entrepreneur based in Boston, Massachusetts. Today I'm here to talk to you about the tongue. The tongue is very misunderstood when it comes to how it plays its part in singing. And today I want to first start by crashing through some misconceptions about the tongue, things that we think are correct but that are actually false. So number one, we want to make sure that our tongue is not flat when we sing, especially in the back part of the tongue. So if you'll take a look over here at my beautiful tongue drawings, you'll notice that this is sort of a front/side view of the tongue. And here we have the primary, what I would call the upper tongue, and then we have the under tongue, which is what I'm going to refer to it as, which consists of primarily the hyoglossus and the genioglossus. And this black part here is the hyoid bone of the larynx where the tongue connects to it. So think of it this way. We've got the upper tongue and the under tongue, the over tongue and the under tongue. So now look at this side view of the upper tongue and notice how it has that nice curve at the back part of the tongue. So it's very important that this back part of the tongue maintain its shape like so that when we sing, we don't automatically press down in the back. This creates a big issue in the under tongue. When the upper tongue presses down, then the muscles of the hyoglossus and the genioglossus are overly engaged and working too hard. And then they tend to shorten and tighten. And since they're connected to the larynx, this can cause many issues, including lost resonance, a wobble or uncontrolled vibrato, singing out of tune, distorted vowels, vocal fatigue, and many other things. Just to give you a little preview of what tongue retraction and depression can do that is negative in our singing. So our goal here is to really map out for ourselves how the tongue functions. So when we're singing on a pure ah vowel, we want to make sure that the tongue is not, as I said, descended in the back. So we want to make sure that the hyoglossus muscle, which you can access by touching here, you can also access partially by touching under your chin, although you'll also be accessing the genioglossus. So if you touch in this soft spot here, that's just above the larynx and slightly back, you should be able to feel the hyoglossus and what it's up to. And we want to make sure that that muscle is not overly tight or hard, because when it is, as I said, it's going to pull and shorten and tighten. That will cause the upper tongue to press down. So we want to be sure that the whole back part of the tongue mechanism stays what I like to call fluffy or floaty. Think of it as a pillow in your mouth. The tongue has many muscles and is extremely strong. So when we overuse those muscles, oftentimes it feels like we are supporting. But really what we're doing is we're supporting the tone with our tongue muscles, which, as I mentioned earlier, has a lot of bad consequences. So when we sing a pure ah, we want to maintain that fluffy, floaty back of the tongue. So let's take a look at wrong and right. So what we want to be sure we don't do, first of all, upon inhalation, we don't want to get a dark inhalation, meaning when we inhale, we don't want the tongue to already be flat. So this is what I don't want you to do. Inhaling where the tongue disappears, but instead I want you to inhale not with your tongue lifted. There's a difference between neutral and lifted, which we don't want. But when we inhale, we want the tongue to be neutral, so you should really see the pink tongue all the way to the back when you inhale. And it's just in its neutral position, because if we inhale with a flat, pressed down tongue, what I call a dark inhale, then we're already starting with the tongue in a poor position, which can have a lot of effect on tone and on comfort. So when we inhale, we want to inhale nice and free. And then to start the ah, Think of ah as a shape, not a sound. Often we try to get the perfect ah vowel by listening to it. And I would like to advise you to instead really visualize the tongue in this position with that nice curve. The tip of the tongue will lie comfortably down in the front, and then the back goes into a natural arch. Ah. And it feels very easy. Now, it might not feel like ah to you. It's very possible that when you do this correctly, it's going to feel like a very odd vowel. It'll feel like ugh, or some sort of bizarre vowel. But chances are you're actually closer to an ah than you think you are. It just sounds very different inside your head when the tongue is engaged and pulled versus when the tongue is really free. So note, this is why I really want you to think of the tongue as a shape and not a sound. So if we're really visualizing our tongue being fluffy, think about when you're falling asleep at night. You're on your pillow, your eyes are closed, you're very relaxed, and your mouth is closed and your jaw is soft. And think about what your tongue does naturally when you go to sleep. The tongue sort of floats gently upward in the mouth and sits in the mouth and really just exists like this as you sleep. In fact, it's quite close to the top of your mouth. It's not laying flat down. So it's very different than, for example, my shoulders, right? If my shoulders are tight, they're like this. And then if I want to relax them, I do that. The tongue does not function this way. If the tongue is tight, it's down and pressed. And when the tongue releases, it goes into fluff. Okay? So we don't want to make this sound. Or this sound. Some of them sound pretty good, but they're not comfortable, and it's not a sustainable technique that's going to allow for you to sing for long periods of time with beauty. It's also going to affect your ability to move quickly in quicker moving agility passages. It's going to affect your ability to sing in tune, and perhaps most importantly, it will be very difficult to have good control over dynamics if the tongue is very, very tight. So this is where we run into the issue of space. What is space? What does it mean? And often when singers associate that word space with their singing, they think about space in the back or a yawn or something like that. And we run into what I call a false kinesthesia, or basically a false feeling. It feels, when we lower the back of our tongue, it feels like we're making all this space. And in a way, you are making space in the upper pharynx, but you're also pressing down on your poor larynx, so they're not very happy. And so what is creating space? So we have to rethink what that means. And so the tongue has to stay in its position and resist the urge to come down when we inhale and when we go to sing. And then the throat here needs to stay nice and open so the tongue can take up space in the mouth so that it is not taking up space in the throat. So we don't want it to do that. It feels very much like you're creating space when you do that, but actually you are pressing down on your tongue and causing issues. So rethinking what space is. And this is again where we want to think about the shape and not the sound. So listening less and feeling more. So if I were to inhale and purposefully make the wrong kind of space, it would sound something like this. Now, I realize that some people really like that nice dark sound. However, there are ways to get that kind of sound without the tongue depression that then causes all the other issues, and sometimes can end a voice career. Because if the tongue is so tight that eventually you're just tired all the time and singing becomes a big chore, and then you have a very hard time sustaining your singing career. So when you inhale, what you want to feel instead is that the tongue stays right where it is. So you inhale with that floaty, fluffy tongue, you let the back have its natural arch, and then you begin your sound. So, is where the tongue has not a single muscle engaged, just floating in the back of my mouth. So really, we have to rethink this idea of space being low in the back, but rather space is behind and above the tongue. So the tongue should not get out of the way, right? The tongue should stay right where it is, and then the space you're creating around the tongue. I call it the column, okay? And so we really want to work on isolating that feeling. And so it won't feel as much of like a specific clear movement when you get the space right, because if you feel like you're making space, it's probably wrong. It shouldn't have a lot of sensation. It should feel like almost nothing. If you inhale properly, notice how my tongue is just, you can see the pink, it's just resting. So what I don't want is now, this brings me to my next point, which is that often what people will do to combat tongue tension or tongue retraction is they will advocate for a forward tongue. This can be useful in some circumstances. However, it's very important before you try to think about a forward tongue that you get the under tongue free. So when we go to sing our pure ah after our inhalation, we want to first check that the hyoglossus is soft. This muscle should not harden. It should not push out to the sides. It should not violently shake, although there will be some shaking because there's some shaking from the vibrato typically. So when we go, that hyoglossus muscle is so free. It just feels like goo. It feels like almost liquid in here, right? So I don't want to feel that pressing down and hardening at all. I can also check under my chin. This part is firmer naturally. It's a harder muscle, so it's normal for it to feel more firm, but it shouldn't be pressing down against your finger. And you also want to ensure that it has a sense of flexibility. So again, you can check here and here. If those muscles are truly soft, then sometimes thinking about a forward tongue can be very effective. However, you have to be careful, because if you simply stick the body of the tongue forward, I may be able to brighten my sound, but it doesn't solve the issues at the root. The root is still quite engaged and tight. So I want to make sure that I'm not just sticking the tongue forward with a tight back. So if you are going to employ any forward techniques, and that's up to you and your teacher, I don't teach it, but that doesn't mean that it can't be effective. You'll want to do so with a soft tongue root. So that also includes the upper part of the back of the tongue. The upper part of the back of the tongue, sort of where your throw up spot is, the gag reflex, you want to sense that that part of the tongue is just floating in space as opposed to engaged or pressing down. So get a good, really close your eyes and make contact in your mind with your tongue. Know how a tongue is shaped. Tongues are huge. They take up a huge portion of our head. And so we must know how they function and what their role truly is in singing. So to review, for this first video, I want the important takeaways to be that tongues are not flat. The tip rests comfortably by the front teeth, right? So we don't want to sing like, oh. The tip is down, the back is high. Think of a whale in the ocean. That is your tongue. We want to maintain this shape at all times. There are some exceptions for some people in the extreme top register. Sometimes the tongue will have a natural little bit of descent, but we want to avoid that for as long as possible so that we can maintain the column space in the back. So the idea of yawn or a dark inhalation or creating space can be very problematic because of the tongue pulling back and retraction. And while we may very much like that sound, it's not going to serve us well over time. And natural darkness comes from correct space. So we want to try to find that natural darkness versus that fabricated darkness. We also want to familiarize ourselves better with the tongue root muscles, the hyoglossus, the genioglossus, understanding where they are and that they're very flexible, and also truly understanding the idea that they are connected to the larynx. So everything that they do will affect your singing, because if the hyoglossus is overactive, which most people's hyoglossus muscle is, then there are myriad issues that come up in your singing. I hope this has been helpful. Please stay tuned. We're going to talk a lot more about the tongue. I really feel it's typically I think it's the most important thing in vocal technique, if we're being honest. I know everybody thinks breathing is, but I truly feel if the tongue is on lockdown, then you don't have a chance at breathing well anyway. So I like to train the tongue first and then work everything around it. In most cases, I'm flexible. I usually sort of tailor to the individual in front of me. But in our next video, we're going to start learning some exercises for separating out the tongue and the jaw and also maintaining a good tongue position. Thank you so much, and I'll look forward to having you watch next time. Take care.